In this video, we're going to look at what I call intermediate single point perspective, meaning that we're not going to just make boxes, basically. We're going to make boxes that are more complicated. So I have my horizon line through the center to give me a normal view, and I put a single vanishing point near the center of the page just to make it easy on me. And I'm going to draw a box here with a basic single point perspective. So the end facing us is rectangular or square, and then 3 points going back from 3 corners. And then I'm going to line up the back end of the box with the front end of the box, make sure that my verticals are vertical and my horizontals are horizontal. Erase the lines going back to the vanishing point to detach it, and then I have a box. This basic shape, repeated over and over again, will give you more complex shapes. So let's start with a building like a barn or a garage. I'm going to make a rectangle for the end of the building facing me. And now I want to put a pointed roof on it. To do that, I'm going to find the center of that rectangle quickly by connecting opposite corners, making an X in the side. And then I'm going to go straight up from that center, and I'm going to make a center line showing the center of the triangle that's going to make my roof. Then I'm going to connect my corners of my box at the top to that top of that line, and I have a peaked roof. This is still all below the horizon, so we're going to see down on the building. Now I have a slightly more complicated shape than the rectangle that I had before, but it's not that much more. I just find my leading edges, everything that's on the side of the building that I can see, and I draw lines back to the vanishing point to do that. Next, I want to draw the back end of the building. To do so, I look at the angles of the front of the building. Here I have a vertical, but on the roof I have a diagonal. Now in a single point perspective, I just take that same exact diagonal angle, and now I have a barn or a covered bridge or a garage. I'm going to put a hole in the side or a door. To do that, I'm just going to put a rectangle on the front like this, and now I'm going to make it into something more like a covered bridge. To do that, I need to turn my attention to the inside of the object and think of more boxes. So here we have a line going back to the vanishing point on the inside of that wall, and I need to find this point here. I trace that over from the back end of the building where it connected on the right hand side. Now I'm going to show you going through the building. And I guess I'm going to harken back to my days as a monorail pilot. You probably didn't know that about me, huh? Oh, at Disneyland, the Mark IIIs. So here we are. I'm going to put a single rail through the center of this open covered bridge, and you can see that I'm just making it a long skinny rail that continues straight through that open space. And I drew that open space by using the angles of everything that I had built up to that point. Sometimes the key to making an interesting picture with single point perspective is just adding a lot of details. Over here I'm going to make a circle, and the circle is going to be the end of a cylinder. And to make a cylinder instead of a box, I'm going to use what we call tangent lines. I'm going to bring the straight edge right up to the edge of the circle to just barely tap it. And that's going to give me a long skinny rail that's round going off into the distance. Now I'm going to come back here and I'm going to look at the front end, and I'm going to try to match that curve. In matching that curve, I've made a cylinder like a log laying on its side. I'm going to go back in here and darken in some of these lines so you can see it better. Now that was the quick way to draw a cylinder. I'm going to show you a more complicated way that will give you a more precise cylinder in the long run when you're trying to scale things. The first thing I start with is basically a square if I can, or something very close to it. So I'm going to start with that, and then I'm going to find the center by making an X, and then I'm going to go through that center up and down. And I'm making this a little bit more complicated than necessary. All you really need is that much, but I'm going to also show you a couple of triangles here and show you where the lines go. I need to intersect those 4 points on the corners around that diamond shape. And to do that, I go through this triangle here, and I go through this triangle here, and this triangle here, and this triangle here. Now there are ways to calculate this with even more points, but 4 will usually do you, and if you can draw a circle like that, you'll get a good cylinder out of it. I lightened up a bunch of this stuff, but I'm going to use the lines that I've still left there so that you can see what I'm doing, and I'm going to actually build another box back here in perspective using the box that I drew on the front as my guide to find my corners and my lines. So you can see that I'm making a square on the back that mirrors the one in the front in perspective. And then I'm going to draw an X and then a plus sign through the center. And I'm going to draw at least half of that cylinder here in the back. And that is to scale now. And I can go from here to here to here to here. And then I take out all those other lines. And this is a much more precise cylinder than the first one that I drew. Using the same concepts, more lines for measurement. So if you can draw a box, you can put a cylinder in it. What's most different about this technique is this is the first time you probably have seen me draw through a box, the parts that you can't actually see. And by drawing through it, I was able to make that back square shape so that I could draw the other half of the cylinder on the back end. That's all great, you may say, but what if I want a cylinder that's upright or something rounded that's on the ground? Well, to do that, you'll need to draw a square in perspective like this, and then connect the corners, finding the center. And remember, this line here is going to go back to the vanishing point, but this one is horizontal. And now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to make a curved line and a curved line and a curved line. And I have a rounded circle laying on the ground. Now I'm going to take this and make a box out of the box that was on the outside with my vertical lines and my horizontal lines. And I'm going to be able to see down on top of this box because it's below the horizon. But you'll notice that the square on the top of the box is more oblique to us, at more of an angle than the square on the bottom. Therefore, the circular shape that we draw within there will be more elliptical than the one on the bottom. Now, I could have gone through the rigmarole of finding the corners, etc., but I think that you've got the idea by now. And so I'm just going to sort of clean this up. You can see the ellipse on the top is more oblique than the one on the bottom. And when I clean everything up and I erase the stuff that you can't see through there, it looks like one cylinder is sitting upright in front of the one that's laying behind it. So we've been collecting some complicated classical shapes here. So far we have cylinders and different ways of drawing it that are more and more detailed and more exact. Let's give you a box here below the vanishing point so we can see the top of it. And now let's show you how to do a cone. Not so difficult. If you can do the cylinder, you can do the cone. Do the rounded bottom just like this. That center line goes back to the vanishing point. And then we're going to do the front end, getting it nice and rounded, and then go up from the center vertically to find a point above it that makes a nice cone like that. Remember to find the center, and you can then draw from that direction. Okay, now let's get really complicated and make a crazy shape up here in the sky. Here's an asteroid that's going to destroy the world. And to do this, we're going to look for all of those leading edges, just like we did on the boxes. And we look for tangent lines if they're rounded. We look for corners. That's the easiest thing to find. And then when we break this off back in space, maybe half to a third of the way down towards the vanishing point, we're going to look at the front end to try to match those angles. And sometimes we'll have to guesstimate exactly how far we need to go because some of those will go behind, like those on the ends. We can get even more complicated. Let's make this a donut. We're going to put a crazy shape in the middle and we're going to make that a hole. To do that, we use the same vanishing point. There are no random diagonals here. All of these lines go to the vanishing point. That's the key idea behind single point linear perspective. All of these lines going back in space are going towards that vanishing point. Now let's draw a building with a lot of windows that line up on the sides. To do that, I'm just going to draw a box. And I'm going to give you some windows on the front that are just horizontal lines to start with. I'm going to try to evenly space these. You might want to use a ruler to do that. That's one of the times when you might want to measure in linear perspective. And now to line them up on the side of the building, I need to use the same lines in the corners of those lines and draw each of them back to the vanishing point. They all match up. You see how each of these lines on the side matches up to one on the front. And then I'm going to section this off. Looks like 7 windows over. I make a diagonal through, and I go to each line in turn, and where that diagonal intersects, I get the same number of windows that I went down. I'm going to do the same thing on the side here, make a diagonal through. Now this is a good technique to use for things like windows or anything that's evenly spaced into the distance, like telephone poles, because the windows closer to you will be a little bit wider than the windows that are farther from you. And that perspective will hold true. I'm going to reiterate my horizon line here and give it a little bit of character. And then I'm going to draw an object all the way in front of the vanishing point crossing the horizon. We don't see the top or the bottom or the sides. And now I'm going to draw a circle over here. A circle, when shaded properly, is just a sphere. So now I have all of my classic shapes. Cylinders, boxes, cones, and a sphere, just for flavor.